Hello, everyone. I'm Meredith Porte, and I'm with the Brahma Kumaris Miami Facebook page. And we've been doing this now for some months, where we invite just really, really special people to be in conversation with us. And if I were to tell you this story, you might not even believe it, but it's such an amazing story. You know, there's lots of remarkable stories out there in the world, right? We see a lot. But this story to me is up there as kind of one of the most amazing stories and uplifting stories that I have heard in a long time. So I want you to introduce you to Paul Saltzman. And I just want to say a few words about his unbelievable career as well. And then we get into his experience. But Paul Saltzman is a highly accomplished TV, film producer, director out of Toronto. And for, I want to say like 40 years, he's been producing, directing so many shows, many of them having to do with social impact and creating change in the world. So he's kind of like ahead of so many other people that are really getting into this today. But of course, we need more than ever. So I just wanted to share a couple of things about him, just so you'd know. He made his feature film directorial debut with Prom Night in Mississippi, a documentary with Morgan Freeman. And that premiered in competition at Sundance some years ago. Then another feature documentary is The Last White Night, Is Reconciliation Possible? Is that ahead of your time, right? Featuring Harry Belafonte, Morgan Freeman, and Byron DeLay Beckwith Jr. That premiered at the Toronto International Film Festival. His life, it just keeps going on and on. One more I'm going to just share. Spread Your Wings. He did that some long before these documentaries, was an acclaimed film. He founded Sunrise Films, and then he turned to drama and actually did a premiere of HBO's Family Playhouse and a special for American Playhouse. I could go on and on all night if you saw the page of all that he's done. But now I want to get to the very, very exciting part. It was in the late 60s, and he's going to tell the story, but Paul spent 1 week with the Beatles. Yes, that's right, with the Beatles in India. And that's it. That's all I'm going to say. I'm going to let him tell his story.
That is your famous photograph.
I didn't even know the Beatles were in India.
I was just a kid with a camera. The pictures, I put them away for 32 years. I just forgot about them.
India, a place of spiritual enlightenment. What happens when a 23-year-old Westerner goes there in search of himself and he finds the Beatles are there too?
I was heartbroken.
Your story is incredible. True happiness is not out there. True happiness lies within.
They took me into their group.
Within 30 seconds, they really were just themselves.
This is the bungalow where I shot those pictures.
We see everything for moments like this. Some of these are the best shots we've seen of the Beatles.
The Beatles were the biggest celebrities in the world, not only for their music, but also for their personality.
The Beatles' visit to the ashram was a turning point in 20th century consciousness.
The kingdom of heaven is within you. You know, that's all it means, to have a peep inside.
The time at the ashram was their single most creative capsule.
They had nothing else to do here but meditate and write songs.
You could name 10 famous Beatles songs. They could have been written by 10 different groups.
Here they are, away from the world, doing what they do, writing music. The ones of John and Paul are astonishing.
Because there are so few pictures of just the two of them.
Who was staying in this bungalow?
Prudence was in this room. Our dear Prudence.
That was here. They went into the room and sang it to her in person.
Yeah, crazy.
Paul, I'm delighted to be here with you.
Thank you, Meredith.
Do you find like people just say they almost can't believe your story, even so many years later?
Yeah, it comes up quite a bit like that.
Yeah. And it was, what year was it? It was the late 60s, right?
Yeah, it was 68. It was actually early 68. I went to India in the end of 67, late December, and then this particular event happened in February, March of 68.
And you went, from what I read, you were a seeker, and you were pretty young then, right? You were 19 years old, and you were seeking, and that was kind of the time for seeking, but you were young, you know? So you just decided on your own that you were going to go to India and study? Is that what happened?
It's sort of a little more fantastical in a certain kind of way. I'm hesitating because I'm not sure if I like fantastical, but so I was working for the National Film Board of Canada in Montreal. I'm from Toronto. And I thought everything was going well in my life. I had already been a civil rights worker in Mississippi. I had a social conscience. I put myself on the line. I cared about these things. I'd already been the co-host of my own TV show, and I drove a sports car. I dated. I thought everything was going well. And I woke up one morning in my little rented room in Montreal, and I had a shocking thought. And the thought was, there are parts of myself I didn't like. And I'd never thought of that before. I hadn't been aware of it. You know, in one way, I was pretty conscious, or I wouldn't have done civil rights work, but I wasn't that conscious about myself on a deeper level. And in that moment of hearing that voice and being shocked by it, I literally swung my legs over the edge of the bed, and I said out loud, without thinking, which is very important, it came out of my heart. It didn't come out of my brain. I said out loud, what do I do about this? And I heard my soul talk to me for the first time in my life. I didn't believe in soul or spirit or God. I was brought up as an atheist. I was brought up to have social caring. I was brought up with the golden rule, do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. But that wasn't linked to any divine presence in the universe. But I heard this deep inner voice that was not me, that was all calming and all loving. And what that voice said was this. It said, well, Paul, if you really want to look more carefully at yourself, you might want to get away from the environment you grew up in. And I said out loud, without thinking, it was this odd conversation. I said out loud, where do I go? And that inner voice said, India. And that was the end of the conversation. So I got myself to India. My girlfriend in Toronto didn't want me to leave. I didn't want to leave. We both cried a lot before I went because we weren't wanting to part. And I got to India, and I worked on a film for 6 weeks, which is how I paid my way over. And I got to New Delhi, and I got my first mail, and I opened the letter from my girlfriend, and the first line was, Dear Paul, I've moved in with Henry. Oh my God. And it was, you know, most people have had a heartbreak or two in their lives. That was the worst in my whole life. I was devastated. I think the word shattered is not an over exaggeration. I was shattered. And somebody I knew for 3 days in my life, I've been trying to find him. He's an American named Al Bragg. And I knew him 3 days in my life. He said, why don't you try meditation for the heartbreak? And I said, I'll try anything. And he said, I'm going to hear the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi speak at New Delhi University tonight. Do you want to come? I said, yes. I only remember one thing the Maharishi said, but in truth, it was what I needed to hear. He said, meditation takes you beneath and below your daily worries and concerns to a place of inner rejuvenation from which you come back renewed and refreshed. And I was sitting there thinking, that's what I need. So interestingly enough, and I think it's kismet, I think it's fate, I think it's divine presence, I didn't think of going up to anyone afterwards and saying, where can I learn meditation? Because they would have said, come to the office in downtown New Delhi and we'll teach you. I learned that he had an ashram in Rishikesh. So a couple days later, I took the train to Rishikesh. I didn't know where the ashram was. I asked the taxi driver, he said across the river. I took a boat across the river. I asked the boatman, who said that way. anyway, I found the ashram, which was up on a cliff overlooking the Ganges, very beautiful. And I got to the front gate and I said, I've come to learn meditation. And the young man who came to speak to me, a wonderful man named Raghavendra, I was 24. I just turned 24 and he was maybe 32 or 3. So he turned out to be my angel. I said, I've come to learn meditation. He said, I'm sorry, the ashram's closed because the Beatles and their wives are here. And we're doing a course for TM teachers. And I didn't know the Beatles were even in India, though I was a fan. Their music had already changed my life. I'd seen them live in Toronto in '64. And I said, you have to teach me. And I told him what was going on. And he said, I'll ask the Maharishi, but I won't be able to come back for 2 or 3 hours, but I'll send you a cup of chai. And he went off, and a bearer, a worker, brought me a cup of chai, and I sat on the dirt path in front of the gate and leaned up against the gate, and I waited. And 2 or 3 hours later, he came back and he said, I'm sorry. The Maharishi says, not at the present time. Those were his words. I quite love language, because to me, language are signposts for living well or not. So I said, can I wait? And he was a little taken aback. And there was a tent set up across the path and under the trees, like an old army tent. There were 2 of them. And he said the first one was being used by a tailor who comes up every day from the town below and is making made-to-measure clothes. So when you look at my photos of the Beatles, and especially the group photo shows it best, the one that Maharishi is in, that those clothes were being made outside the gate, made to measure by the tailor. And he said, and the other tent's empty. You're welcome to sleep there. I had a sleeping bag. He said, and we'll send you our simple vegetarian meal. So this man was an angel. So I waited outside the gate for 8 days. That's how long it took. And he finally said, okay, you can come in now. And he taught me meditation. It took 3-4 minutes. He said, try it. He gave me a mantra. He said, try it. I tried it, closed my eyes and started. And then he said, after a minute or 2, what are you experiencing? And I said, well, my knees are hurting. I had never sat cross-legged in my life. He said, my knees are hurting, and I'm being distracted by the dog outside. A dog had barked a couple of times. And he said, that's fine. When you realize you're not saying your mantra, don't wrestle with yourself or you'll be out of the meditation. Just gently choose to go back to the mantra. So I did that. And then he said, I'll leave you alone now to meditate on your own. You're now welcome to spend your days in the ashram and take your meals with us, but there's no extra bed, so you'll still have to sleep in the tent. I said, great. And he left me alone. And I did a 30-minute meditation. And in that 30 minutes, I transcended twice, transcending normal consciousness. What that meant in my experience was I was present, I was sitting up, I was wide awake with my eyes closed doing my mantra. And then something happened and I was back. And then I did it more mantra and something happened and then I was back. And when the 30 minutes ended, I just opened my eyes, I was finished for whatever way I knew I was finished. And it was an absolute miracle. It was an absolute miracle because there had been a knife in my heart. There had been a screaming in my head that I could hear. And when I finished the 30-minute meditation, the knife in the heart was gone. The screaming was gone. And I was in a state of bliss. Who knew? Who knew? Like, what? Duh, who knew? So then I walked out into the sun and I wasn't even thinking of the Beatles, but I met them, shortly thereafter.
It's an amazing, amazing story. And it seems to me like it was divine intervention repeatedly. Everything just lining up for this to happen. It just wasn't, you weren't going to be stopped from getting to India, from being outside, not being able to go into the ashram. Now you're in the ashram, the healing. It's one thing after another. It's quite, no, I don't even want to say amazing, but it's just one of those powerful transformational experiences in one's life. Not that everyone has them like this, but I think many people do in different ways. So now that you met the Beatles, what happened? Here's some pictures we got that you took. You were the photographer.
Right.
Tell us about, what you were doing with the Beatles once you met them.
So this particular picture was not set up for me. This was the Maharishi, and I affectionately call it the class photo, because what you don't see is there's about 60 people behind the Beatles on either side, so that I have a shot that's much wider that shows everybody. But he hired a photographer from the town below who came up with a big 8x10 plate camera, a classic old camera. And he took photos. The Maharishi told everyone where to sit. He told the photographer where to stand. And I was just around, so I took pictures. In fact, what happened was that George had a camera, George and Patty, and George asked me if I could use his camera to take some pictures for him. And I said, sure, great. And then Ringo saw this and he asked me if I could take some pictures for him. Sure, great. And then Mal Evans, their roadie, asked me. So I had 4 cameras around my neck and I took a bunch of shots, and I gave the cameras back. So that's what this picture is. And then everyone who was on the TM teachers course, which was a 3-month course, they all got black and white prints of the photo to take home with them. So these photos, the one of John you just saw and the one of Paul where they're singing, they were just fooling around singing, and I came along, and I only took out my camera twice in the whole week I spent with them because I just didn't think of it. This is sitting on the bungalow that they were staying in. And I took this shot through a chain link fence that was there to keep goats out of the garden. And then I walked through the gate, and that's when I took the 2 close-ups, and I just sat with them. And this particular shot and the few that follow it, they were composing and writing Obla-Di Obla-Da. And so at one point when I got there, they were just fooling around, bits of songs I recognized, bits of songs I didn't recognize. And when I sat down, and you can't see it very well, but I'll point out something in the picture. But when they sat down, they started singing Obla-Di Obla-Da, Bra, Walla, How the Life Goes On. And they were singing it over and over again. That was all the words. And then I looked down. I was sitting beside Ringo right there against the post. And I looked down, and you might be able to see, but under Paul's right toe, there's a little squiggle. It's actually a piece of paper that he's holding down so that the wind doesn't blow it. And I look over, and on the piece of paper is written, Obla-Di, Obla-Da, Bra, Walla, How the Life Goes On. So he was looking down. He must have just written it down because it was brand new. And they sing it over and over and over again, and they're playing with it joyfully and, up tempo, down tempo. And at one point they stopped to take a breather. They started again fairly quickly, but I took a picture of Paul. He looks up at me and he smiled. I took a picture and he said, "That's all there is so far. We don't have any of the words yet." And then they went back into it. And what I experienced really was the joy. They were such joyful people in their lives, in their work. And I believe that's the source of their magic, really, that joy.
And the innocence, there's something so innocent about them. I mean, and they were already world famous, but
they were at the top of their fame.
Yeah. So what I know you had some other interaction with them, George Harrison. I think that I read that he was the one most interested in talking to you about spirituality, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, what happened was with George was, we would all sit at this long table out by the edge of the cliff with sort of an arbor above us with trees that shaded the table. And that's where we would sit when nobody was doing something else. We would meet there for some meals or coffee or chai mostly and cookies and so on. And one day we were there and everyone got up to leave to go get ready for a meal or something or other. And George and I were just sitting alone. Nobody ever talked shop. I never heard any talk in the week I was there about music or recording or touring or Beatles. The word Beatles wasn't in the air. And but for whatever reason, I said to George, I love the way you brought the sitar into into Beatles music and into the oh gosh, what's it called? Norwegian Wood, the song.
Yeah.
And he just lit up, and he spent a good 10, 15 minutes telling me of his love for the sitar, how he first saw it on the set of Help, how he picked it up and started plunking away. Somebody gave him a record of Ravi Shankar. He met Ravi Shankar and he became his student. And he spent 6 months with his wife, Patty, in India over several trips in 66, 67, studying the sitar. And then he said, I was just going to go practice. Do you want to come? And I said, great. The one picture I wish I had taken, but I just didn't think of getting my camera because I literally wasn't thinking Beatles. It sounds strange. Well, I'll tell you because of what we're talking about. The second time I heard my soul talk to me is important. So I walk out of the meditation room. I'm in a state of bliss, and I'm walking along. The Beatles are not in my mind at all. Seriously, not at all. And I'm walking through the ashram, which isn't a big place, and I'm just looking around. And at one point, I look over to my right, and about 150 feet away, I see John Lennon sitting at a table. And I can tell it's Paul with the back of his head to me. And there were other people, but I couldn't see very well through the trees. And I literally found myself curving towards him. I must say it this way. It was not a thought. You know, I work with a lot of young people, and if it seems appropriate, I say, you know, this is a wonderful computer. It's a shitty guidance system. This, the heart, is a wonderful guidance system. It's a shitty computer. So I wasn't thinking of the Beatles. I literally just found myself curving towards them. Now I'm walking towards them, and I'm about halfway to them. And I just noticed, in this altered state of bliss, I just noticed, oh, my heart's beating a little faster. That's all I noticed. I got to the end of the table, and they were talking, and there was the four Beatles and their four partners, three wives, and Jane Asher, Paul's girlfriend, Mike Love of the Beach Boys, Mia Farrow, the American actress, Donovan, the wonderful Scottish folk singer, and Mal Evans, their roadie. There were 12 of them sitting at a long table. And I was quiet. I didn't want to interrupt. I was totally at peace in the state of bliss. And they realized somebody is sitting there or standing there. So they stopped talking, and John turns to me. He's sitting 2 feet from me on one side, and Paul's 2 feet from me on the other side. And John looked up, and I just said, may I join you? And he said, sure, mate, pull up a chair. Paul turned to me and said, come and sit here. And he moved a chair over at the end of the table. And I sat down, and then three magical things happened. And I want to say the way I use the word magic, I found about 15 years ago, I found myself using the word more. And I knew what I meant, but I wanted to see what the dictionary said. So I went to the dictionary, and in the big Oxford etymological dictionary, there were 25 meanings of the word magic, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And as I started reading it, because the dictionary wasn't something I used much, I realized, well, number 1 is the most common usage, and number 25 is the most rare usage. And down around 23 or 24, it said this: magic, that which is real, but we as yet do not understand. Brilliant, brilliant. So 3 magical things happened. I sit down, and before I have a chance to think, back to that, back to the thought not interfering with the experience. And of course, we all have our thoughts all the time, but still, there's a way to, meditation in part is to separate from thoughts and to be in a state of being, without a goal, without an agenda, with just to be quiet inside. So what happened was I sit down, and to my shock, I hear a scream in my head. It's in my head. Eek! It's the Beatles. I've never said it in my life out loud. When I saw them live in Toronto in '64, I wasn't screaming. I had both my ears cupped trying to hear them over all the screams. There were 18,000 people in a hockey arena, right? So I hear this scream in my head, eek, it's the Beatles. And as soon as that voice finished, before I had a chance to think, I hear my soul talk to me for the second time in my life, this deep, inner, all calming, all loving voice. And it says, hey, Paul, they're just ordinary people like you. Everyone farts and is afraid in the night. That's what it said. And when that ended, I never thought of them as the Beatles. I spent a whole week with them. I never asked for an autograph, and I'll tell you what happened next, because they took me into their group. What happened next is John turns to me, and in his wonderful, wry, digging, playful, tart wit, brilliant man, lovely man, he says to the group, he says to me first, he says, so you're American then? And it's not a compliment, right? It's like the Brits being superior to the Yankees, the colonial and the colonized. He's playing with me, he's teasing. So you're American then? And I say, no, Canadian. And he turns to the rest of the group and he says, he's from one of the colonies. Now we're all laughing. And he turns back to me and he says, so you're still worshiping Her Highness then? And I say, no, not personally. And then Ringo and Paul start teasing me about having the Queen on our money, which we still do, and which they do. And I said, hey, we may have the Queen on our money, but she lives with you guys. And so we're all laughing away. At which point, Cynthia Lennon, down near the end of the table, she says, come on, chaps, leave the poor guy alone. He's just arrived. Clearly, she's used to their teasing and playfulness. At which point, John turns back to the rest of the group and he says, you see, they still have a sense of humor in the colonies. And that was it. They just took me into their group. I sat with them for a week when we weren't doing other things, when I wasn't meditating or they weren't meditating or they weren't writing songs. But I literally never thought, oh, I'll ask for autographs. And I could have had them. And I never thought, well, I'll get my picture taken with them. I literally never thought of it. Because the Beatles, literally, as crazy as it sounds, they disappeared. And it was just people I was hanging with. So I only thought of taking out my camera twice. I only took 54 pictures with anyone famous in them. And I had many rolls of film because I was thinking I'd go around the world.
So you were really, what I'm getting is you were really in the moment for that week, except for a couple of little, spots. You weren't thinking so much, about them, or like you say, or being in pictures. You were just there in the moment, which is, to me, such a high level of experience to be able to get to. So I'm wondering what impact has this had on your life now, so many years later? I mean, as I hear the story, it feels like it just happened, but years later,
well,
has it changed your life? Yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, first of all, I love when I do interviews because it brings the joy back, and we're talking about really important things here, not about Paul. That's fine. I'm me, you're you. We're talking about universal matters. We're talking about love and creativity in this conversation, and we're talking about meditation. We're talking about connection with the divine in the universe. I like to call it God, Goddess. That's how I address it. When I'm when I'm working with young people in schools or universities or community groups, if I'm doing something, a screening or whatever, if I do happen to mention it, I say, because it's real for me, I say God, Goddess, because, hey, God is not a guy. We think God's a guy, right? A male energy. Well, yeah, God's a male energy, but Goddess is a female energy. And as we know, they in fact work in concert with each other, as within all of us. So how it changed me? Well, first of all, the meditation changed my life right there. Who knew? And, my soul talking piece for the second time, I now have a relationship with my soul that I talk with I switch between calling it my soul or my higher self. And those are apparently two slightly different pieces of self, but I use them interchangeably. And I talk to my higher self every day. It might only be for 10 seconds or 30 seconds. I hear her. To me, it's a feminine voice, which doesn't matter. I hear her talk to me. And, you know, one of the most evolved spiritual teachers I've ever worked with, he said, you know, if you don't hear God or Goddess talking to you, it's not because they're not there. It's not that they're not with you. It's that you're not listening.
You obviously were listening. You were listening when you were quite young, and I get the feeling that you continue to listen and convey these messages today. I mean, the messages that you learned from your amazing encounter with the Beatles, but all of the lessons and experiences. I'm so glad to be able to be here with you to share these, because that's what we're all about, you know, our spiritual organization and so many others around the world, you know, the messages and the way of thinking, which is just, you actually were able to live it for that 1 week, which changed your life. And, and, you know, I wanted to say one thing is that really, I mean, and I think many people do, of course, know this, but because of the Beatles, I think the consciousness of the entire world, or a lot of the world, was changed from their time in India. Who knew about India before that? You know, a few seekers, but I mean, they made people want to go to India. They made people want to meditate. Their music has so much spirituality in it, you know, not all of it, but it's just, so you are, I feel that you're kind of a messenger, you know. I did want to say, because we are out of time, but I wanted to say a couple of things. Your show is going on right now as we speak. Tell everybody what the show is all about.
Yeah, so I'm in my, so, you know, in terms of how did it affect my life, briefly, I put my pictures away and forgot about them for 32 years. I literally forgot about them. And the story of all that and all of what we're talking about and more is in a film I've just finished, which has been a joy for me to make. So I made a film. It's a feature documentary. It came out recently. It's called Meeting the Beatles in India. And it's about me and it's about them. It's about me because I felt I had to tell the story on a level that was intimate, because hey, I met the Beatles in India, look at my pictures, who cares? You know, I mean, that's interesting. But what's more important is that whole trip in a film is really about the inner journey and about creativity and about meditation and the magic of creativity and meditation. So, you know, it's impacted my whole life in that way. So I wouldn't be here in Miami if the lovely couple who own the Betsy Hotel, Leslie and Jonathan, didn't say, hey, can we do a show of your photos? Yeah, wonderful. So there's a whole bunch of my pictures up, and there's an opening tonight, which is Thursday. And it's actually an opening for 5 artists. I'm one of them. The others are painters or collage makers or so on. And it'll be a lovely event. And yes, you know, this is all, just to wrap up from me, this is all about heart and soul. Like, why are we here? You know, I have a funny way of thinking of it. The astronomers say there are billions of suns in the universe. There's got to be inhabitation on other planets, probably, I don't know. But the way I think of it is, hey, we could all have our own planet. Why are we here together? Well, we're not here together to make war. We're not here together to hate and loathe. We're here to love, to create, to have relationships of creativity and love. And that's what the divine had in mind. But of course, as you know, we have free will. So you want to kill, you can kill, probably get away with it often. You want to steal and rob, or you want to be a person of kindness. Do you want to be a person of love, which is to me divine? You know, back to this old expression, God is love and love is God. That's all you know and all you need to know. Yes, so that's what this is all about for me.
Well, it's a story that to me continues. And I did want to mention that the show will be going on for the next few months, 2 months at least, right? So anybody can just show up at the Betsy? I think
that's
so.
Right. That's
to see your work, your incredible work of the Beatles. And I'm sure there's many, many Beatles fans out there still. And I know that even young people, they love the Beatles still. I've encountered many young people who are still listening to Beatles music. I mean, they've impacted the world. And I think we were also going to get to show a trailer of your film. And you had a book. You've written a book about the Beatles. So I think your message continues. So you are the messenger to me. That's how I see it. And you've been a peace activist, a social justice activist long before it was in vogue. I mean, it was always there. And I can see very clearly, and I'm sure everybody else sees when they meet you or see your films, that you are here to really do good in the world. So I'm thrilled.
Thank you.
Thrilled to meet
Thank
you.
you. Well, and same to you, or you wouldn't be doing this show and you wouldn't be talking to me. And to me, you know, it's all about joy. You know, it's all about joy. I mean, I have a hobby. I lead small tour groups to India. Why do I do that? Because people have asked me to do it, and it's joyful. I share my love of India. We do a great tour. We end up at the ashram and spend 3 days in Rishikesh. And why? You know, because it's a joy. I mean, you know, I make a little money, but not a lot, but it's a joy, and that's worth its weight in gold.
We might meet in India one of these days. The Brahma Kumaris have their school too in Mount Abu. And, you know, we come and go to India all the time, except in the last year we haven't been able to. So who knows, maybe we will meet in India at some time.
Beautiful.
It's a
Thank
pleasure,
you.
a thrill, I should say, to get to meet you. And
Thank you very much, Meredith. I really appreciate this.